All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour, where Twitter has finally been forced to permanently suspend a few of the accounts that the Indian government had requested that they need to be suspended. Now, in the blog, Twitter has said that it has now suspended more than 500 accounts. It responded to the Indian government's order to remove over 1,000 accounts for what the Indian government claims is spreading misinformation in connection with the farmers' protests. However, Twitter has said that it believes that the orders passed by the present Indian government to take down these Twitter handles are actually inconsistent with the Indian law. And therefore, for some accounts, Twitter has said that it has not agreed for an outright ban, and instead it has restricted access within India, and these accounts that are restricted within India for access will continue to remain available outside of India, is what Twitter has said in its blog. Now, Twitter was served with a separate blocking order from the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology under Section 69A of the Information Technology Act. These accounts were listed by the Home Ministry for trying to trend what it describes as content that in many ways was trying to stoke tensions in India. Twitter had acted by withholding them for a brief period of time, but later, because of the outrage there was on Twitter, it decided to restore all of these accounts and had unblocked all of these accounts, citing insufficient justification for their suspension. Twitter, however, has said that it has subsequently restored access to the content in a manner that Twitter believes is consistent according to the Indian law, for which it received non-compliance orders. The Indian government has now asked Twitter, believe it or not, to take down 1,178 handles that the Indian government claims have Pakistani and Khalistani users actually operating them. Now, according to sources, these accounts were used for sharing what the Indian government has now described as provocative content, and also for amplifying misinformation on the farmers' protests that have gripped the nation over the course of the last 2 months. Now, many of these accounts were also, according to claims that are being put forth, many of these accounts were automated bots that were sharing this content, asking more and more farmers to come and join the protests. Now, the stakes are high, remember, for Twitter in India. It has millions of users. The platform is also ardently used by India's incumbent Prime Minister Narendra Modi and also many within his cabinet and also other leaders to communicate with the public. India happens to be the third biggest market of Twitter, and it remains as to how this entire controversy goes on. To give us more perspective in terms of how all of this is, of course, unfolding, we're joined in by WION Siddhant is joining us live from New Delhi on this broadcast. Now, good afternoon to you, Siddhant. Bring us up to speed with what is happening in this bit of a back and forth between Indian government and Twitter.
Well, Mohammed, it's a full-fledged war of sorts between Twitter and the Indian government. The Indian government has sent a number of notices. The first notice was sent on 31st of January when the Indian government asked that 257 accounts should be blocked. Then again, there was another notice, as you just mentioned, asking for blocking more than 1,000 accounts. Now, Twitter today morning in a very extensive blog said that they have acted on 500 accounts, but said categorically that they are not going to act on certain accounts. These are accounts which were pointed out by the Indian government. These were journalist accounts, these were media accounts and other accounts, and said that when it comes to freedom of expression, that is something that is Twitter policy. So they are trying to balance between local laws and Twitter policy. But what is interesting is that the Indian government has reacted. Just 10 minutes ago, the Indian government has reacted, talking about a meeting that was expected to take place between Twitter and the IT secretary, saying what is the need of this meeting now, given the fact that Twitter has already reacted. But what is interesting is the way the Indian government has reacted. They have used a local app, local India-made app on the lines of Twitter called govt, which has been used by a number of ministers here in India. And that is something that can impact Twitter, because increasingly now there is at least the focus that there should be use, of course, of India-made product as part of India's Atmanirbhar policy, but also moving away from Twitter. That can be devastating for Twitter, because India is its largest market. And if more and more ministers go, that will send a message across that more and more people or Indians should move towards domestic made or manufactured applications or other things. So largely it's a battle of sorts between Twitter and the Indian government.
Absolutely, indeed. It's an interesting strategy that the Indian government seems to be resorting to, where it is trying to promote one of its own apps. But at this point of time, Siddhant, the fact of the matter is the Indian government had requested for more than 1,100 Twitter handles that the Indian government claims were being operated by Pakistanis and Khalistanis to be, in many ways, if one were to use the word, suspended. But Twitter has responded by only suspending and restricting their access of only about 500 accounts. What further action will the Indian government now take here?
Well, Indian government has been sending notices. I'll give an example of the 31st of January notice, which called for suspending certain accounts which were trying to trend genocide. That, of course, can impact things on the ground here in India amidst the backdrop of the farmers' protest. Twitter did comply to that. But then again, within few hours, Twitter unblocked them. The Indian government sent another notice. They did not act on that. The similar thing happened on 4th of February. The notice was sent. Half of them have been blocked, but no action has been taken. So it is some kind of a battle of sorts. We know the dialogue which has been talked about. The Twitter team saying to the Indian government that they would like to have a formal dialogue, but things are not moving, and this is frustrating the Indian government. And largely, Twitter being a global company which has jurisdictions across the world, if you look at how things work for a multinational company, it can use other ways to survive in a sense. So where it is troublesome for Twitter is their point, in a sense that they have a huge market here in India, and the Indian government has this another policy, the policy of Atmanirbhar Bharat, and that is the way forward for the Indian government's next step for Twitter. That if you're not going to comply with our orders, our notices, then of course we have other ways which include forming another app and making the Indians move towards that app. That of course will be obviously devastating for Twitter.
Absolutely, indeed. We'll have to leave there. Thank you very much indeed, Siddhant Sibil, for joining us and getting us all those updates in terms of this very interesting and this very crucial story that's developing of this back and forth between the Indian government and the social media giant Twitter. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.